We'll go ahead and get started. My name is David Kennedy, if we haven't met, and I am the Media and Technology Director for the Oregon Ministry Network. And I'm glad to welcome you to our second Synergy webinar for 2023. And just want to say thanks for setting aside time in your day. I'm excited for our presenter that we have with us who has set aside time. I'm looking forward to learning and growing in the gifts. This is a Synergy webinar. Synergy is a new, I would now say a newer ministry. It's working on its second year of existence, and Synergy exists to provide admin resources and services to the local church. The vision behind it is to enable ministry leaders to minister effectively to the people of their church and community. And a part of that is growing in admin gifts and also the services. In case you didn't know, Synergy offers really a full service accounting solution that you can sign up and they will assist you in taking care of the finances of your church. Our director of that ministry and the Oregon Ministry Network finance team, Jeremy Anderson, is on the call. He is the dreamer, the vision caster for this ministry, and I'm thankful for him. Next, in just a couple months in July, we're going to have the next webinar in this series. It's titled Level Up Your Video, and it's going to be going to feature our very own Brittany Dunn. She is the social media specialist for the network, and she'll be presenting on July 19th at 10 a.m. I'll drop a registration link in the chat before we're done today so that you can look at that. With that, we'll jump right into content for today. I am excited to welcome to our webinar today, Mark Forrester. Mark is the Senior Director of Public Relations and Communication for the General Council of the Assemblies of God. He's a graduate of Lee University and our very own Assemblies of God Theological Seminary. He is the general editor of this book that I would encourage you all to consider taking a look at it. It's been something I have looked at as a resource, Trending Up. He and his wife, Janine, have 2 kids, and they live in Springfield, what I lovingly call Mecca. They live back in Springfield, Missouri, and are a gift to our the National Fellowship. So we're blessed. He is going to be presenting today on the topic of crisis communication. So you know, when he is done, we will have a time of question and answer that you can dialogue directly with Mark. With that, I will turn it over to Mark. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Just by way of introduction, thank you for that introduction there. But let me give you a little more background there. When I stepped into this role about 15 years ago, there weren't like digital media degrees or anything like that. All of this was brand new. And so we were drinking from the fire hose, just trying to find out, what's this new thing it was at the time. And, people I know who were kind of colleagues in the industry, we were reading like hundreds of articles each week, just trying to keep up and understand what is this thing? What does it mean? And so one thing that I did, I felt a little overwhelmed and thinking, is anyone really qualified for this at the time? And so I tried to gather as many people around me as I could to kind of do my own cohort, basically, of shared knowledge. And so I just started reaching out to people who I thought were doing a good job with it. I created like a private Facebook group, and it was kind of my peers and other denominations and mega churches and organizations that, look like they had a good aspect of this. And that kind of led into an annual summit that we did, all kind of inadvertently, that we've been doing for the last decade. But the whole purpose was, I don't know everything that I need to know, but I want to gather people around me who can fill in those gaps. And I think, events like this with Synergize help you build those relationships with other people who can fill in the gaps. And I look back and I think, wow, God must have helped me put that together, because there have been so many times that I've thrown out a lifeline to that group of friends, and they've been able to rally around and bring things to my attention that I wouldn't have known otherwise. And it's just a good group of friends and people, and that's what the book came out of. We had just sat together and said, what are the top 15 questions that you receive? And we gathered those together and wrote on those just as this group of friends together. But even at a local level, district level, whatever you may find yourself in, gathering yourself around with people that you can share ideas, trade information. I can't emphasize enough the value of that. So diving into crisis management, that's kind of a scary term. The word crisis itself is a little bit scary. Let me try to share my screen here, just a second. But when we're talking crisis management in a public relations sense and in a social media sense, doesn't have to be like a major crisis that we're talking about. It's crisis management could be something as simple as a negative comment that you're dealing with, or a complaint that you're trying to resolve. So crisis management doesn't just mean big things that are like in the news or otherwise. It can be kind of those smaller issues as well. Just a second, I'm trying to unlock that screen. Right. Here we go. Hopefully you're seeing that now. So first of all, one of the big changes in communications that social media brought along was related to customer service. And I think for us to understand that, we have to kind of put our mind in the attendees' mindset. And so here are some expectations that they would have. 76% of consumers expect a response within 24 hours. And if they're getting that consistently with brands that they follow, with companies that they engage with, it's going to seem a little uncaring if the body of Christ has less of a personal connection to them than Delta, American Airlines, McDonald's, whoever. And so it's good to keep in mind what their expectations are when it comes to brand engagement. 64% of Twitter users say that they would rather tweet a company than to call the company. And so it's really brought a revolution in terms of customer service. If there's an issue that someone has, if there's a question that they have, if they're curious about what an organization may offer, or if they have a complaint, it goes to social media first, where before it may have been that dreaded anonymous letter or phone call. It's a little more public now. And studies show that answering a complaint can increase brand loyalty by as much as 25%. I know that's a little difficult to understand how brand loyalty can increase by a percentage number. But when a company looks at this from an outside perspective, they say people will be more likely to buy our product again if they know that we care and that we're addressing their concerns. Let me just give you an example of this. One of those friends I was talking about in this cohort, this community that I kind of gathered around, he was VP of the Phoenix Suns for 20 plus years. He's, solid believer, solid in his faith, but he shares an example of this, of a journalist who was attending a Phoenix Suns game kind of, under the radar. He wasn't there officially to report, but he's following social media during the game and notices this image pop up with a blue check user saying, here's my obstructed view seat. And it's just this massive pole right in front of his right in front of his seat. He's like looking over, trying to view the game. And so he thinks there, how can we go over the top to turn this negative tweet into a positive situation? So if you've heard the term surprise and delight, those are used a lot in a social media context. And so the strategy there is you're trying to take a social media user and surprise and delight them, with some sort of experience that can leave them with a different impression of what they came. So he identifies, okay, where's this guy sitting? He gets him a box seat up in a VIP lounge. And then the guy publishes a story on, wow, this is customer service. And if you want to see good customer service, go to a Phoenix Suns game. And so what was a negative experience of just this guy kind of tongue in cheek tweeting about what a horrible seat ends up being all kinds of free publicity for Phoenix Suns. Just think for your church and for the community you serve, if you're able to take a negative experience and turn it on its head into just one of those surprise and delight moments for someone, the witness that becomes to the community and how that makes Jesus look to your community when you're able to turn that around. I have a good friend, and when she gives talks like this, it's cheesy. So prepare yourself for the cheesy quote of the day, but tweet others as you would like to be tweeted. And so it's definitely high on the cheese factor there. But if you think in those terms, when you approach your social media channel, it can actually address a lot of the questions that you have. Do you like to be ignored when you raise a concern? No. So why don't you tweet others as you would like to be tweeted? Do you like when a brand engages you? So why don't you, as a brand, as your church, as your community, why don't you engage that community in the way that you would feel good if the other brands or individuals that you follow engage you? So use that as a general guideline. Going to dive into some really practical insights, things that I call, just smart communications. And some of these are going to be just kind of rapid fire. One thing that I see that's kind of a common source of problems for churches is when the individual who is managing your social media accidentally post over from their private channel to the public channel. This has happened to government entities. It's happened. It's not, just churches that you see it. It's a frequent thing that happens in social media. Another friend I have who contributed to the book, he was with ESPN for close to 2 decades. He started their MLB channel, NFL channel, all of this. Tony Dungy tells him, hey, Jason, one thing that's going to grow your faith is tweet out a scripture every day. And when people notice you're not tweeting out your verse of the day, they'll call you on it, and it'll keep you planted in the Bible. So one day Jason tweets out his verse of the day, and his phone just starts blowing up. He's thinking, what in the world is going on? That really resonated with people. Then he realizes, oh no, I posted this on ESPN's channel. And so he's going in as fast as he can to delete, and he's getting a call from like one of the presidents, like, you're on the line for this one. And, you know, there are all these conspiracy theories popping up, like what was ESPN trying to communicate with this verse? And, you know, what were they really trying to say? And it's just he posted to the wrong channel. That's a little more of a positive case, but there have been tons of negative cases where someone has said something and they accidentally put it on a church's channel, on a denomination's channel, on a brand or government entity. What I encourage people to do is manage, whenever possible, your church's communications, either through a separate web browser or a separate device, separate apps, whatever. That way, you know, when you're in this browser, when you're in Chrome, when you're in Safari, whatever, that is your church communications, and your logins aren't going to mix up. When you're in this other browser, it's going to be more of your personal. Just try to keep it completely separate as much as possible, and that'll help with some of these mistakes that happen. Some things that I'll go through here may bleed a little beyond social media, but it's also common things that I see a lot in my office here. Emails, text messages, internal communications. Beware of the BCC line. Again, this goes a little beyond social media communications, but I've seen time and time again where people get embarrassed because they use that BCC line, and then there's a reply all, and church members' feelings are hurt because, you know, why was this individual BCC'd or whatever. The only reason I use BCC is if I'm stepping someone out of a conversation. And so, you know, it could be a colleague that helped make an introduction, and then I move them down to BCC and carry that over. But it's not to secretly include someone in a communication. And I could give you dozens and dozens of examples where church crisis has started with a BCC of someone, and then the person accidentally replies to all, and it ends up being a bigger deal than what it needed to be. If you need to send something to an interested party, like consider sending it from your sent file rather than BCCing the person in. Be professional when you're dealing with your communications and whatever that is, even if it's colleague to colleague, and just know anything has the potential of being public. And again, this is one of those common things that people think, oh, this is to a friend or whatever. And if you're going to be ashamed for this to be public, then just don't send it. Be smart with your communications, always document. So also avoid thinking of things only in local terms. We used to have this thing in public relations where you would consider, you know, some things just strictly local and some things national, some things global. Any situation in this social media age has the potential to be a big deal. I can think of a situation with a church in the last, 12 to 18 months that it's a church of about 15 people. and a fist fight broke out in the church. And before you know, it was covered in media, coast to coast, just because of the videos that were included. And so you can think, oh, this is something that's contained on a local level, but it's really easy for things today to go beyond that. And so always, when you're approaching a situation at a local level, keep in mind that the way you handle it, even within that small context, can blow up in a bigger way. I have an image here of the installation of a pope in 2005 versus 2013, and you can see the big difference is all the devices being turned on, and that's a decade ago, and it just makes us aware that things are being recorded in any context. Monitor media and create lists. So this is being aware of situations as they rise. I've heard from airline executives that they say a lot of times now that they discover issues with their aircraft from social media before they find out through official channels. And just having an ear to the ground helps them be in front of a situation. You can anticipate crises that could happen and be proactive in a response. Southwest Airlines, for example, they have a Monday meeting and they're looking at weather patterns across the country, and they're anticipating we could have canceled flights in Dallas and Denver, all of these areas. So what are we going to be telling customers in these areas, and how do we version out communications? So think in terms, is your church hosting an event? Are you hosting an outreach? Are you doing something, and what could go wrong? And be prepared ahead of time so you're not caught off guard. So anticipate. I encourage people, even if you don't like Twitter, if you don't like the platform for posting, create lists on Twitter. That's something that can be done in a public or a private sense. So you can have private list of accounts that you're following or topics that you're following, and you can monitor at a glance and be aware of situations as they rise. So for example, you could create one of, community leaders, of, different influencers within your area, and at a glance, be able to know what's going on within your context, which helps contextualize your communication. De-escalate through listening and making others feel heard. So when we're talking about de-escalation in communications, we're trying to lower the temperature. And so when someone has a concern, a complaint, if they don't feel heard, usually the typical person isn't just going to walk away. They're going to keep looking for a way to feel heard, and each time escalate, usually in a more public sense along the way. And so if you handle criticisms, complaints, concerns, while it's coming at a lower threshold, say a comment in a news feed, a lot of times that can prevent it from escalating into say a website that someone's creating, or an email list of people that they're trying to make aware of a situation. Just be aware as things come up that ignoring it usually isn't the best posture. Ignoring it isn't a de-escalation tactic. It usually just escalates. And so make the individual feel heard and acknowledge the situation. It could be good, positive feedback. It could be something that is misinformed, and maybe there's additional insight that you can provide, but just avoid the temptation to just ignore negative feedback and think that it'll go away, because usually it doesn't. There was a few years ago that Apple, their not Geek Squad, uh, it's I'm losing the term right now, but their customer service training manual was leaked out, and some of you may have seen that if you follow kind of tech forums or anything like
Genius,
that.
it's
Yes,
Genius
Genius,
Bar.
Genius Bar. Yes, thank you. So, uh, one of the tactics that they use, which is actually a pretty common uh, public relations and customer service tactic, is the feel, felt, found model. And so feel, felt, found in a customer service context, say the example that was used, the customer says, this Mac is just too expensive. The genius says, I can see how you would feel this way. So acknowledging the feelings. I felt the price was a little high, but I found it's a real value because of all the built-in software and capabilities. So this is obviously corporate training, but there's actually a good truth beyond this. What they're trying to do is acknowledge feelings, and then the additional feedback that they're trying to provide doesn't come across in a defensive way. And a lot of times when we respond on social media to criticisms, we come across in a defensive way, and it tends to shut people down and they don't feel acknowledged. But something as simple as acknowledging the way they felt, even if the way they felt is based on inaccurate information, that can help establish empathy and create some common ground. So people, you don't hear vocal tone in these written communications, and it's really easy for someone to just assume that you're yelling at them when you correct a piece of information. But establishing empathy and that feel, felt, found model really helps with that. I'm going to talk a little about consistent statements or communications, and this goes into more if there is like a crisis happening in your community or at your church community. So, say there's a situation that's affecting your church family that has, it could have legal implications or so on. First of all, let me just say that our office here stands ready to assist any time that a situation would arise. We respond quickly to info@ag, opr@ag.org, and my direct email address is mforrester@ag.org. But if you find yourself in one of these crisis situations, one thing is be sure that you have full context before you respond. Before you draft replies or posts, just make sure that you're well informed on what you're responding to, because if you only have part of the information, you could end up communicating something that ends up looking like a lie because the person you're responding to have more information than you do. Also be aware of cultural items, trending news that may affect what you're covering. I'm a big proponent on my teams at the national office to say we're not going to schedule post out more than a week in advance. I know some churches that have posts scheduled out 8 months in advance. That's the most I've seen from one church. But it's pretty common, at least for some churches, to do 2 or 3 months out in advance with content that's scheduled out on social media platforms. My big caution for that is how can you possibly keep attention on what's happening culturally and how what you say is being interpreted in the moment. There have been several cases where pastors or leaders have even put out scriptures or so on that have been scheduled far in advance, but because of a national crisis or cultural moment that we're facing, those comments are interpreted in a different way. And so before you go to social media even if you are posting months in advance, just be aware of what's happening and be prepared to stop that post before it publishes. But that's why with my team, we don't go more than a week. So we're sure that everything that's being posted is at the front of our mind and that we're well aware of what's happening in the news and what's happening in culture, to where we don't come across sounding insensitive or disconnected or anything like that. Tell you, this one sounds like a no-brainer. Tell the truth, but I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say in different contexts, oh, this is technically true. This, that, or the other is technically true. If you find yourself saying technically true, then it's probably misleading. And so, as the body of Christ, we want to have high integrity in what we communicate and how we communicate it. And so we never want to be misleading. We want to be forthcoming. And so never mislead in your replies or statements. And speak to your audience. So it's easy to lose context, and especially if someone's being really rude in a social media context or demeaning in some way. But think of all the eyes on that content, and your community is still your primary audience. And so keep in mind all the other eyes on that. The commenter you're replying to is part of your audience, but they're not the complete audience who's going to be seeing that interaction. So even if someone's being rude, hostile, whatever you may find in that situation, respond in a way that brings God glory and that honors his name, and remember who you're speaking to, and don't be distracted to deviate from that audience. Those are just based on a lot of frequent things that I see coming across here, and I think that gives us still a lot of time for Q&A.
Thank you, Mark. What we're going to do, we can do questions two ways.
I think you might be muted again, David.
Yeah,
So,
I think you lost me. Sorry, I picked my finger up. You can send a message by chat if you're more comfortable that way, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question directly. I have some, but I'll leave some space to get started. Let me jump in. I wrote a question as you were speaking, Mark. You say you made the comment to monitor media, creating lists. You reference specifically tools like with Twitter, lists that you could use that way. Are there any other tools, ways that you are monitoring out there to know what's being said out there? Could you get into kind of maybe some of the practicals?
Sure. So if you're looking for tools like this, kind of like the industry term is listening platforms. And so I'll start with like free solutions. Twitter lists work really well, especially in whatever context you are, say in a community, having local news services, local reporters, other churches, ministers, community leaders, and so on a list that you can quickly look in and manage. Twitter has changed a lot over the years, but it's still kind of essentially a press release engine. Leadership quotes and things mixed in throughout, but a lot of news still breaks through Twitter. And there's a lot that you can gain from creating lists like that. Google Alerts. If you haven't subscribed to Google Alerts, I would really encourage that. You can set up any term or phrase and receive alerts when those pop up in news or media. So at a minimum, your church's name, your name as pastor, other relevant terms that may be there. And you can either get a daily delivery of that or something a little more real time. And that'll also help you in that context. There are a number of subscription-based listening platforms, anywhere from like Sprout Social to just a variety of things. But for most churches, most of these are going to be priced a little outside of what the average church would be looking for. I know, for example, some of the higher end listening platforms could be more than, $250,000 a year for that. And that's, more of like what's used on an industrial level. But for the purposes here, if you're looking for something more robust, Sprout is a good option. And they have nonprofit pricing as well.
Thank Anybody else have a question you would jump in? I have a follow-up then, I guess another, maybe not follow-up to that question, but to the presentation. When I think of crisis communication, I've thought in the past about drafting in advance, having almost, hey, here's my pre-written prompts almost. If this was to happen, then this would be, and if this was to happen, then here's something to jump in. Do you do work like that? Do you think there's value, or is it better to deal with them case by case?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of depends on the situation as well. But definitely, if there's something that has legal implications, you're going to be wanting to run those statements by an attorney. And from a PR standpoint, we're usually looking at short, simple statements. I know the inclination is to have that 3-page volume response on an issue with all the information, but a short, simple statement is usually much more effective. The more information that is included in a statement, especially in a legal context, can carry a lot of liability with that. And the other danger is your staff can seem inconsistent, or your key volunteers, if there's a complicated statement that you're releasing, because they may be focusing in on the last end of the statement. You may be focusing on the middle. Someone else may be focusing on the beginning. And it just looks like, oh, they're all saying different things. A short, simple statement helps you keep consistency and helps you speak with one voice. And if you're dealing with a reporter is rarely going to release a long statement, but a short, simple statement, it helps you maintain control of that quote that ends up in the article or news report. And so short, simple statements are just much more manageable. And so having that in advance, if your church community is going into a crisis, and sharing that with key players, your social media manager, church staff, key individuals, board members, whoever that may be within your context, it helps everyone stay on the same page and not communicate information that may be inaccurate.
Mark, there is a question here. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll read it. For crises that are very sensitive, for example, issues related to LGBTQ plus racial issues, they're happening in the church's context or nationally or statewide. How would you suggest going about posting? Do you suggest not posting about those things if something doesn't need to be post if something does need to be posted, would you have suggestions about how to go about that? Kind of loaded, that's a
Right.
big one.
Right. Yeah. And I think it kind of depends on the crisis, on how it affects your community and how it affects the people that you're um, ministering to in your context. If it seems to have a direct uh, relationship there, I think you would want to address it in some sense, but you would also want to be on mission and how you're addressing it and not be drifting off mission in any sense. And so you're not speaking to something necessarily because it seems on trend to be talking about it, but it's something that affects the people you're ministering to, and it's part of your mission in responding to it and how you're responding to it. I tell you, the other thing with this is these topics will bleed over to social media platforms, even if you're not posting about them. And so you could be posting John 3:16, but all your comments are about this other cultural topic that's going on. And so that kind of has to be a content moderation strategy from your team's standpoint. I've changed over the years how I deal with that, and part of it was because of it was around 2014. There was an event. There was a crisis that the national office was speaking into, and there was a comment early on in that post that if it were moderated appropriately, the next 200 or 300 comments would have been very different. And so my approach changed a lot after kind of that crisis situation, in that if there is a real rabbit trail comment, the way I deal with those rabbit trail comments now is I hide the post and use the message. I'm talking through Facebook for this. I hide the post. I use the direct message feature and respond to them through a direct message. But if it's a complete rabbit trail, nothing to do with the post at all, that's how I deal with those, which is different than the way we used to. We automatically delete something if it's spam, if it's harassing an individual, like say it's a live stream and they're, clearly harassing the people's looks or appearance or racial, anything like that's deleted. People trying to convert other people, we get a lot of that, whether if it's, people from other religions will follow the AG page and then try to convert the people that are in there. So we remove those. And then people kind of inappropriately singling out someone by name, we remove those unless it's a legitimate concern. But if it's just a Pastor John Doe's crazy and I hate him, those are the ones that we would remove without those without context. But on these cultural issues, if they come up as a complete rabbit trail, I find kind of that message option as a much better way to respond and de-escalate the situation. But all of these just have to be considered on a case-by-case basis, because it's difficult in a blanket sense to know how deeply it affects your community and the people that you're ministering to. I hope that's helpful.
Anyone else? I hate to leave any time. Is there anyone else that would have something they would want to jump in on? Leave some space for just a minute.
I was just going to comment real quick. The blind carbon copy, the BCC and stuff. I try to be very wary of that when I was in business. Every once in a while, something that went to corporate and then it got copied to whatever. Anyways, but the other is that I think that you're covering here, Mark, is the be careful of anything you respond. Even when you do it privately, when you take them down and you respond privately. And I like what you said about sometimes we just don't respond because it's just the right thing to do. Because even if you respond to them privately, they can cut and paste that, they can screenshot it and send it out, and you're hung that way too. And so one way or the other, as my friends say, if you don't want it on the 6 o'clock news, don't do it.
Right.
And so it's the same with all this too. And boy, it can be misconstrued and the enemy's trying to kill us. So anyway, I thought that was a good point.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, we assume everything is public, no matter what context it's going in. I would also say, like, just be aware of like odd trends or anything like that. If you start getting the same question repeatedly, just know, some curiosity, what's behind this. And it could be something that looks like a black and white response, but when you do a little bit more digging, you realize there's something else going on. We get a lot at the national office of kind of these like an entrapment type post, and you start seeing, we got this question, 20 or 30 times today, what's going on? There was a situation a couple of weeks ago where we started getting just dozens and dozens of it was a very simple question that they were asking, and it would have had a very simple answer, but because of the volume that they were coming from and the part of the world that they were coming from, it kind of raised some red flags. And we did some more digging and realized that, it was a persecution area of some people that have been affected, and standard response would have been really harmful to the people in that area. And so we had to kind of go back and retrace and see, how do we respond to this very simple question that we were getting about 60 times a day for several days from this part of the world. It would have been very harmful to the people in that context if we would have not been fully aware. So just be aware of traps or setups or anything like that. If someone emails and says that they're a reporter, if someone, is doing that, we always do due diligence and, try to check out the news agency or anything like that. And you'll be surprised how many times, person is not with the organization that they claim to be with or anything. So just be smart and due diligence.
The last I always like to ask, who are you following? Who are you reading? Who are you listening to? That would be helpful. Along these lines of social media and everything that's related to this. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll circle back to what I was saying at the beginning, that by far the most valuable resource in this area is kind of that peer-to-peer group that I built, where we're constantly asking, hey, have you noticed this trend? Have you noticed that? How are you responding to this? And those personal connections that you can build can help just immensely. We'll say, hey, have you noticed video reach is going down? Yeah, but we noticed if we shorten it, or if we do this at the beginning, it helps. Or, just talking to other people helps you get ahead of the algorithm in a lot of ways. I read a lot in this area, obviously, just because it affects so much, but by far the most valuable thing that I could say in a social media context, more than any book or blog, is just go directly to these platforms, and they all have a newsroom. And if you're really interested in this, follow what they're saying from their newsroom, because they always put out basically teaser information on this change is coming, the way we do this is changing, anything like that. If you craft your communication to where they're identifying through their newsrooms that this approach is going to work better, you'll see an increase in your reach. So if they say, for example, Facebook recently said through their newsroom that videos over 3.5 minutes were going to have better reach. And so doing that little tweak to make sure that the videos aren't, the post videos aren't, too short, all of a sudden we saw a bump in reach. And bloggers may have been saying something different because they're basing it on their experience, but following the newsroom, how the engineers are crafting the platform. And when you use it the way that they're crafting it, then you're going to have more success with that. So following the newsrooms, I think, is just hugely beneficial. But beyond that, I also emphasize that communications in any form is an art and a science. And so, say, for example, I could know everything that there is to know about Microsoft Outlook. I could know all the coding behind it. I could know everything, and I could still send a really bad email. And so just knowing how the platform is built doesn't necessarily ensure good communication. There's an art that goes into that good communication. It's context. What time is the communication going out? Who is it being sent? Does it adequately address those audiences? And so knowing that, I always tell people, no matter what the advice is that's out there that you're reading, test different things, test different times of day that you're posting, test different types of content. Maybe you've always thought videos don't work well for your platform. Well, maybe they do now, so try it again. Maybe they don't work well in the mornings, but they do in the evenings. Maybe they don't work well on Mondays, but they do on Saturdays. Maybe images work better at a different time, or articles work better. Just constantly keep switching it up and notice the trends of, oh, here's what works at mornings, here's what works on weekdays, here's what works on weekends, and how your audience is responding. And just that constant willingness to test and try new things will increase your success on your platforms, because your audience is unique to you. And you could be seeing a trend on the other side of the country that a blogger is responding to, that a website is responding to, but your audience could be completely different. So do what works well with the people that you're trying to reach. And the best way to know that is constantly test.
to the registration. And there it is. It's in the chat. There is a link to the registration today. Sorry, trying to move too many fingers around. Again, thanks for being here this morning. Mark, it was great to have you with us. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much
so
for your time.
much. I
We
appreciate
appreciate
it.
it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Blessings, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.